Okay, we're ready to move on to our next session from Jane Excell and Phoebe Walker, Coming Together in Crisis, How ILL and Acquisitions Formed a New Partnership to Meet User Needs. Jane Excell has an MA in Experimental Humanities from NYU and MLIS from Long Island University. She has worked in technical services at NYU for 6 years, and over that time has developed a deep interest in collaborative consortial acquisition practices that work to build diverse, inclusive collections in both print and e. Phoebe Walker, BA Linguistics NYU, has been involved with resource sharing at NYU since 2016. She has a strong passion for access services and is primarily interested in improving library staff and user experience through consortial best practices and technology-driven workflow enhancements. Jane and Phoebe, take it away.
Oh, I think you're muted, Phoebe.
You're correct. Hi, everybody. Can everyone see our slides? Okay, great. So Jane and I are very excited to talk to everybody today about how we've been working together for the past year. And I'm also going to be sharing in chat a view-only version of our slides if anybody would like to follow along there as we talk instead of in the Zoom view, or if you want to linger over a bullet point or a graph or something while we move on, you can do that as well.
Yes, great. Yeah, thank you guys for having us. So as Phoebe mentioned, we're just going to give sort of a brief summary of how, even though there had always been this desire for our two departments to collaborate, unfortunately, it wasn't until COVID that we sort of found the incentive to make that a reality by working together to fill patron requests electronically while the New York area libraries were closed. So it was a bit of a silver lining for us to get that opportunity to collaborate. And we're happy to share the results of that with you today.
Okay, so I'll be starting us off to talk a little bit about where ILL was pre-pandemic. Our purchase on demand topic had been discussed, but never really implemented during my time in ILL. And I know it had been discussed before I came to ILL at NYU as well. And it had always been thought of in a print context. Our users have always displayed a very strong print preference, and a policy for us in ILL was to always even allow additional print fulfillment, even if we did already own something in E, if the user asked us for that. Our many consortial memberships like Policy and Shares and service subscriptions like Rapid and Easy Borrow for ILL made the buy borrow debate not very urgent. We had a very robust network to get stuff over ILL, even repeated requests over ILL. So we used that instead. An interesting related tidbit is that in 2019, a reorg of our division of libraries did put ILL in the same overall department as collection development for the first time. So I know we were starting to think about this again in a print context, but the two were very previously siloed. And of course, collection development would be upstream from acquisitions, and that's how it would have been related. And then all of our ILL processing work was done on site. We had no telework for ILL processing. So then in March, when we suddenly were required to shift to telework, we had hundreds of requests, and I use a very large school, and they like to use ILL and delivery services. So we had hundreds of requests waiting or already in processing at the time of shutdown. And because of how we had always done ILL, we had very little experience in sourcing full things in E unless NYU just already happened to have a license for something electronically. All of our custom holdings path and processing decision trees for loan requests that we had followed for years were pretty much rendered useless due to closure of all of our partners. And so by taking the route we're going to talk about with you today, ILL staff were able to kind of drop full book fulfillment requests and focus on article and scan chapter requests, which were still in our wheelhouse and still somewhat possible due to other libraries still lending e-resources or the very few very valuable libraries who could still lend from print.
Great. Yeah. So to give sort of the similar background picture for acquisitions, before the pandemic, all our single title, one-off ebook purchasing was limited just to librarian selections on the eBook Central platform. Everything else came through our package subscriptions. All of those orders were handled by a single staff member as a very small workflow. And our acquisitions department actually, up until just shortly before the pandemic, was not located in the library. We were actually in a separate building a couple blocks away. So that sort of further siloed our operations. And as with ILL, all our work was done on site. So when we shifted to telework, the need for additional ebook sources and more staff trained in working with them was very quickly apparent. But sort of luckily, we had all these staff in the acquisitions department who were trained in searching and purchasing print materials now at home with some time on their hands. So it made a lot of sense to sort of leverage their expertise and sort of pivot that into an all electronic fulfillment system. And at the same time, we were just looking to expand our ebook sources as much as we possibly could, including anything open access, some of the sort of temporarily open platforms that came along in the spring semester, including HathiTrust, Internet Archive, and some textbook rental platforms that were waiving their fees. So yeah, acquisitions had this searching and purchasing expertise. ILL obviously had all these requests to fill, so it made a lot of sense to sort of combine our forces. But of course, there were some challenges. As we mentioned, there was the lack of any real substantial interaction between our departments before that. Relative ignorance of each other's workflows and tools, especially Iliad and GoBee, our purchasing platform. And just the complexity of this workflow, that would require a lot of setup, coordination, training on both sides, as well as technical assistance from an outside department.
But all of those challenges in mind, we were also keeping in mind the opportunities this would bring. I don't know if any of you have been keeping count of the number of times Jane or I have said the word silo so far. It's high. It's talked about a lot at NYU. We're a big institution. We're aware that we are, and we're always trying to do work to unsilo ourselves, but it's hard to do. So, when we see an opportunity to do it for a reason, we knew it would have more long-term benefits other than just the project at hand. It would increase staff understanding between departments, about how we do our work and introduce new tools and workflows. And it was an opportunity for staff to contribute in a real way on very tangible requests that had a very tangible effect on a user from home. And then, of course, the bottom line of actually filling these requests. We hate to say no to ILL requests at NYU. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the timeline that all this happened in. So on March 13th, which was a Friday, lucky Friday the 13th, pretty much all of New York City shut down, and we were told to go home and work remotely until further notice, which meant on Monday the 16th, we all logged back into the remote work environments that Jane and I described in our previous slides. That following Friday, we were in a meeting to talk about what to do next, because what became apparent in that first week is, along with all the requests we need to fill and what are we going to do about that, the difficulty of getting library systems set up remotely, getting people access or training to systems they haven't used before. We had a lot of outcry from the library saying, oh, I'd like to help, but you have to actually put that into place. So a genius idea was developed to, instead of getting people set up with Iliad and handling the requests directly, to share that out into a more shareable format, like a Google Sheet, that could be shared far and wide, and as many people could be added to it as necessary without a lot of training. So on Friday the 19th, we were in a meeting with data analysis and integration, we'll call it DAI for short, moving forward to discuss how acquisition staff could search requests outside of ILLiad. And I would like to credit the technology specialist for access services, Joseph Faust. We were very fortunate that he's been with us in access services for a couple of years, but he was an internal hire from elsewhere in the libraries and previously had worked closely with both DII and Jane's team. So we think him knowing the right people to put into a room quickly really helped us with this impressive timeline of getting this put together. So by March 27th, DAI had put together the integration and functionality that we had asked for. By March 31st, acquisition staff, Jane's team was trained on their new workflow. And by April 3rd, my staff in ILL were trained on contacting users with the results. And we had all the necessary updated templates and everything set up, which means about 3 weeks to get things moving.
Yes, very, very fast turnaround, especially it seems that
it's
way
all
in
a blur.
retrospect. Really, for real. Yeah, so as Phoebe mentioned, our wonderful data analysis and integration department was able to use Google's API to sort of help us overcome that hurdle of needing to train everybody in ILLiad and instead have us work with the Google Sheets, which was obviously much easier. And so we immediately started arranging our potential ebook sources into a sort of a hierarchy so that we could start with the free platforms and then move to the purchase options if we couldn't find something for free. And then if we could find that link, it would be imported automatically back into a special ILLiad queue so that the ILL staff could send the link and any instructions, if we had found it on a textbook rental platform, the instructions for how to create your individual account, stuff like that. And, knowing that it would then be free, that they could send that back to the patron using ILLiad's notification features. And of course, we also sent them back the unavailable requests that were imported to a different queue. And that way ILL could send a specialized cancellation notice for those. So here's just a little screenshot of that Google Sheet integration that I just mentioned. So on the right side, you can sort of see where it says loan author, loan title, etc., the request information. And then on the left, you can sort of see the statuses that we use to route that information directly back into the appropriate ILLiad queue, as well as the links here. You may notice it says CARMS. CARMS is the larger department that houses acquisitions, but we wanted to sort of spare you too many acronyms, so we're just going with acquisitions. But yes, every morning, new requests would be imported into the sheet, and every night, the results would get pumped back into ILLiad. So here's just a little bit more about our searching hierarchy. I'm sure it's not surprising to many of you that we just started with a search of our own catalog, since it's not uncommon for patrons to potentially miss that access there. And then if we didn't already have it, we would move first to HotieTrust. And since we are Hotie members, our access was really expanded by their emergency temporary access service. And you'll see the impact that had in a minute when Phoebe talks about the results. And if we couldn't find it there, we would look at some of those rental platforms that were providing free access in the spring semester, as I mentioned, as well as the Internet Archive as sort of a last resort. And if we couldn't find it on any of those free sources, we'd then examine potential purchase sources if there was a reasonably priced copy available through either EBSCO or eBook Central.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the results of this process. So we kept this process going from when we started in late March, early April through the end of August when we were preparing to return to on-site work, so our entire telework period. Because it did work so well for the initial requests we had active in the system at the time of shutdown, we kept it going, and at no point, we put some some banners on the website and banner on top of the ILL form advising users, it's not usual ILL, you know that, right? But we were actually able to keep our ILL forms active and continue to accept requests to try and fill it digitally if we could. So through that, we searched 1,450, around about there, total requests between March and August. And around 500 items were successfully sourced of that amount. So that's about a third. And we're very pleased with that when we had no access to our print collection at all. And I provided a graph here that shows kind of a breakdown of the success we got from the different sources. I believe VitalSource and Red Shelf ended access, the free access that they were providing, or the waived fees they were providing around the end of the spring semester. So somewhere towards the end of May, is that right, Jane?
Yes.
So obviously they're among the lowest, but I mean, those are textbooks. So they're very, very useful and important resources. So we definitely, even though they're small in number, we don't want to discount their value to our users. So now I want to talk a little bit about our current process. So Jane and I, as well as other members of our teams, talked a little bit before our return to buildings, before the start of the fall 2020 semester. And we did decide that it would make more sense based on the distribution of work that was going to need to happen on site for ILL to kind of start taking over with some training from and advice from Jane's team, start taking over the digital fulfillment part of these requests. So ILL now conducts e-first searching. So for every request we receive, unless it's a hold on something we have available in our collection, if it comes in for ILL for something we don't have available, and the user wants the whole thing, we try to digitally fulfill it first using the same hierarchy that Jane's team used, and we have accounts and access to Gobi in order to select ebook titles for purchase. And Iliad has a Gobi add-on, which we did not previously know, so that's made it very easy to implement this. We can do the searching and selecting right in Iliad. We have begun collecting location and delivery preference information from users to get more actionable data if e-fulfillment is not available. So like that's our first pass. But we now have begun starting print fulfillment again. And then Hathi and Gobi purchasing are, again, our top tier for all NYU user requests. And we do still use the Internet Archive if the user has indicated, based on that location delivery information we're collecting, that they are a remote user and maybe not eligible, especially if they're a global user. We have lots of international students and are not eligible for our print pickup or delivery services. We're also starting to talk now about future collaborations because we enjoyed working with each other so much. So one thing we're already doing is, since we have access to the Gobi data anyway, ILL can now see if a print copy has been ordered. That will show up, if you're searching for an ebook version in Gobi, you'll often see the print as well, and the data will be right there that it has been ordered or even already shipped to the library. So we're working with Jane's team on how to effectively get that into the hands of a user that we know wants it, and get that rush processed and into our new delivery workflows. So that's sort of the tail end of a print on demand system. So we're also starting to think about, well, what would ordering print on demand off an ILL user request look like? And we're excited to talk about that more. We've also, just through our continued interaction now, been comfortable revisiting policies that do tie ILL and acquisitions together, like our replacement policy. We did not accept replacements for a very long time from either users or other libraries. So now we're going to update the policy and try accepting replacements when it makes sense, if something is lost by another library when we've loaned it out on ILL. And who knows what else. We intersect so much. So that's all we have for you. I think we're going to open it up for questions now.
Thank you very much. That was really great. And I see some questions in the Q&A, and hopefully more will come in. So if any attendees would like to ask questions, just post them there in that Q&A.
I'll read off the first one. So when you were moving acquisition staff to assisting in ILL, how did you address concerns about working out of classification and or position description?
That's a great question. I guess it didn't really seem out of classification for us for most of it, because these staff members previously had a big part of their job was to search and fill print requests, and they were now doing pretty much the same work, but just all electronically. So yeah, wasn't too much of a problem.
Next question is, have you done anything to encourage professors to purchase ebook copies of their textbook for easy student access? Yes, we try. That's mostly handled by our course reserves department. So that's an entirely, I mean, we work closely with them. They're in access services with the resource sharing and delivery services unit. So we certainly do our best, but some things simply aren't available, or the professor isn't really engaged with course reserves.
Sure. So I can read the next question. Putting this question in early, you may cover it later. What budgets covers your work for the items you need to pay for, and would you be willing to share the amounts? Well, I don't think we have the amounts offhand. We do place some price caps on the individual orders. They can vary depending on whether it's for a course or just for an individual user. But the budgets generally are our general book buying budgets for new purchases.
I believe everything came out of the collection budget for these purchases. That is a topic that has come up when we've sort of tickled the idea of purchase on demand in the past, is, well, who will pay for it? And I think, yeah, there's definitely interest in sharing the underlying cost if that's what it needs.
Okay, I see in the slide searching hierarchy, if a book chapter or article could not be found in any of the electronic sources and required a physical item, were you able to fulfill the request during COVID? I'll let you take that, Phoebe.
Yeah, sure. So no, if all of that was exhausted, no. So I don't think I actually did mention this, even though I meant to. So when things were imported back into Iliad by Jane's team, there was a request stream for successful fills, and there was also a second queue for things they could not find. Each of those got tailored notifications to the user, and the ones we did not find, they would get something prompting them to try a book chapter, though we would often try to check holdings first to even see if that would be possible before we presented them with that option. And if everything was exhausted, we would send them a specific cancellation notice, again, tailored to the environment we were in, that both linked them to the subject specialist page on our website to encourage them to reach out to our librarians who, while you can't get this particular thing, perhaps if you talk to a librarian, they could suggest an alternate resource that is available right now. And then also some language about trying again later once we were maybe no longer in the situation you're in. Things have improved, but I think this is stretching on a little longer than any of us planned. So looking back, I think some of that language might have been a little hopeful. But we would tell users to come back later, basically.
And have you ever considered subscribing to Occam's Reader or any other similar applications that will enable you to borrow ebooks from other libraries? I'm not familiar with Occam's Reader.
Yeah, so I know a little bit about it. And it's funny, it was like in the year leading up to the pandemic, I was, as the ILL supervisor, starting to look into ebook borrowing and looking at what they're doing with the consortium in Virginia to loan ebooks back and forth. It's just not something we had a whole lot of time to invest in, but it's something we're interested in, yes.
And I think I can take the next question of, do you purchase textbooks? And yes, we would purchase a textbook if it was, within our price range. But that's also where those textbook rental platforms that we mentioned earlier and that Phoebe mentioned, VitalSource and RedShelf, really came in handy, that they were offering their textbooks for free during the spring semester, because, textbooks often aren't available through some of the main ebook packages or can be exorbitantly expensive. So that was a great free resource to be able to leverage.
And then I think we have a couple last questions. Someone asked, when you say, quote, imported back into Iliad, do we mean staff manually entered the data into the request? So yes and no. So Jane's staff were manually entering data on a Google sheet, and then DAI using Google's API at a set time of day. I think it was 6 p.m. We thought people wouldn't maybe be actively in Iliad on our end. Based on the queue that her staff had chose, either CARMS online or CARMS unavailable, that information and requests would port into those custom queues into Iliad for us. And for CARMS online, it would include the link, and we designated a specific field for that. I believe it was item info 5 for the link. And then we had a notification that was tagged to that queue if you're Iliad users and know what I'm talking about. So that's how it worked. Her staff weren't entering it in Iliad directly. They were entering it into a Google sheet, and it would essentially be copied into the Iliad transaction for us by an API. Okay. Someone asked, do you have a specific criteria when to buy based on an ILL request? And if yes, can you share them? Yeah, so basically, like I said, right now it's digital first fulfillment. So we will buy first if it meets certain price criteria and is available from, meets certain vendor criteria, and isn't available through one of the free digital platforms. But we're open to, adjusting that decision tree as we move along and circumstances change.
Then we have curious why Internet Archive was at the bottom of your hierarchy of free options. I think that had to do somewhat with, some of the controversy around the Internet Archive and, their decision to open up all of that content, which was not, viewed as potentially fair to authors and publishers. I think they are potentially facing some sort of suit for that. So that's why we made it our last resort. But if we couldn't source it any other way, our top priority was to get that content into our users' hands.
And I'll add that coming from an ILL perspective and making a fair use argument, being able to say that you tried other options first and then went the route of the Internet Archive's free option is in support of fair use. Well, it wasn't available. It was a last resort effort. Okay, I think we're about out of time, but I think we got through all the questions.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you to both of you very much. That was a really great presentation, and we're happy that you could join us today. And now I believe it is time for a little break before our next presentation. So we will reconvene here at 2:10. So thanks to both of you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.